the one thing in my experience was the teammates and the coaches and how they impacted my scenarios, where they didn't necessarily know what was going on, nor did they have any idea of how to even handle somebody going through a concussion. And this was a bit back before Rowan's Law and everything, but still it really impacted what I went through. And I guess this brings me to my next question, which I'm going to bring to Dr. Pennock. Just what type of things impact reporting behaviors with athletes and other sports stakeholders, and what is the onus on sports stakeholders to understand more and to do more?
This is on. Yes, maybe. Okay. Yes, it's a great question, and underreporting of concussions is, I don't want to say a hot topic, but it's certainly an important one. And part of the issue with concussions and with reporting is we kind of view concussions as this invisible injury, right? Concussions can be so different from athlete to athlete, and even for an athlete, they can be different from concussion to concussion. So a lot of the onus tends to fall on the athlete to readily report their concussion to a coach, to a trainer, to a parent, and so on. But what we're seeing in the literature is that athletes don't report, and I'm sure for many of you as clinicians, coaches, healthcare professionals involved in sports, parents, you might know of athletes who continue to play through their injury. So a lot of my research is focused on looking at underreporting and what's causing that. And Mike alluded to a lot of these concepts when we start to think of the sociocultural and the psychosocial environments that are around an athlete and what makes them to choose to report or to not. And one of the big factors that I could definitely draw on is the sport environment itself and how that's kind of shaped around the coach-athlete relationships and then athletes' relationships with their peers. So when athletes are in environments where the culture is around playing through pain, pushing through injury, demonstrating your toughness, it makes it really difficult for athletes to kind of go against the grain and say something. And it's almost like that there's this sweet spot that's happening where athletes, they know that they shouldn't underreport. Generally, athletes tend to demonstrate a high level of concussion knowledge, and when you ask them about clinical symptoms, they tend to be able to kind of list them off, especially in Ontario where we have Rowan's Law and we have this required level of education. But then you have athletes who kind of get into this debate with themselves over whether or not they want to report something. So it's almost this sweet spot between athletes don't necessarily want to underreport, but they also don't want to overreport. And by overreport, I mean athletes who aren't quite sure if they have a concussion or not. So maybe they tell their coach or they tell the trainer, and then they're pulled out of the game or the practice or the competition, and then they can't go back in. And then maybe they get assessed and it wasn't actually a concussion. So in some of the work that I've done, athletes have expressed this fear over this uncertainty that I could end up over-reporting and then I can't play and I let my team down and so on. So I think part of navigating this kind of worrisome area is around the climate, and that's the climate at the coach level within the club to promote that, hey, if you go off and if you have to report, you can come back in. Like, I'm not going to give up your spot. Like, I'm not going to Billy might come in, but you'll be back as soon as you're healthy. And coaches starting to foster that climate that supports athletes wanting to play. But then this also needs to come through at the sport administration and the club level, right? How are sport clubs and sport organizations supporting concussion policy? And are they able to start shifting the culture in the club where that becomes the norm rather than athletes not saying anything at all? And some of that will also come through with policy, right? Having policy changes where athletes can actually be removed from play and then be sent back in. But some sports, unfortunately, don't allow that at all, right? If you're taken out, that's it. So I think it's a multi-level problem, and it's going to take a really multifaceted solution for us to move forward with it.
Absolutely. And I think that's going to be a common theme that we're experiencing today, is that at least for us here at Heads Up, we believe it takes everyone. And that's obviously common in the research, and I appreciate you sharing that.